Nothing that we need to take up before we have the jury join us?
Not that I'm aware of, Your Honor.
I don't believe so. Thank
Nothing
you.
on behalf of Mr. Burns. Okay, very good. Bring our jury in, please.
Please rise for the jury.
Please be seated. Good morning, jury. We will resume testimony. Mr. Maybanks or Mr. Harris, the state may call its next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Mike Wyrick.
Mr. Wyrick, good morning. You're headed to the jury, or the witness chair, excuse me. Mind your step there. And before you sit down, please pause and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Go ahead and be seated. There are just a couple of rules that we have when we're in the courtroom speaking. Because we have a formal record being made, it's important that we not speak over one another. So please wait for the lawyers to finish any question before you begin answering. And I'm going to ask them to give you the same courtesy, not to cut you off. Also, there's obviously a microphone in front of you, so I would ask you to just be mindful of that and speak into the microphone. Okay?
Will do.
Thank you, sir. Please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names for the record.
Michael Dean Wyrick, and it's Michael. Last name is Wyrick.
Thank you. You may begin your examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Wyrick.
Good morning.
Do you go by Mike?
I do.
Mike, we're going to have you tell us a little bit about yourself first. How old are you?
I am 59 years old.
Where do you currently live?
Cedar Rapids.
And what do you do for a living, Mike?
I run my own advertising agency, which I have since 2000. Before that, I worked for KCRG, which is the ABC affiliate in Cedar Rapids, for 10 years.
And were you born and raised in Cedar Rapids?
I was actually born in Illinois. My family's from mid-Missouri, and very shortly after I was born, I spent until I was about 3 in the Lake of the Ozarks area, and then we moved up here. My dad had got a job at Rockwell, or Collins back then.
And that's a pretty big employer in the Cedar Rapids area, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So did you spend your entire childhood then and into adulthood in Cedar Rapids?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Where did you go to high school?
Kennedy High School.
And what year did you graduate?
79.
Speaking of 1979, we're going to bring you back there for a moment. We had several witnesses testify yesterday that knew Michelle Martinko. You're kind of the last in that group of those witnesses. And so my question for you first is, what were you doing, in your life on or about December of 1979?
Well, I was a student at Iowa State University.
Did you know a person by the name of Michelle Martinko?
I did.
Okay. And how did you know Michelle?
We met, we were both doing a play called Pippin, which was the spring play at Kennedy High School in the spring of 79.
We heard a little bit about Pippin. What was your role in that play?
Space filler, mostly, I think. I was part of the choir and sort of an extra more than that I had any real useful role in it.
And so you met Michelle then while you were both in the play together?
Yes.
Tell us how you got to know her in that scenario.
Well, it's been a very long time, and I'm a little fuzzy on. We all were just spending time around each other doing this play, and I had gotten to know her a little bit, but how I got to know her better, really, is she had one of her friends, somebody that was in her class of 80, and I don't really remember who it was, tell me that if I hadn't asked anybody to prom, I should probably ask her to prom, that would probably go pretty well for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Was that something that you felt to you like would be a good idea?
I felt it would be an excellent idea.
All right. Did you ask her?
I did. I didn't do a very good job. I stumbled around a lot. I was pretty shy and, not very socially mature at that point, but I finally got it done, and she said yes.
Oh, so despite your shyness and awkwardness, she said yes. Okay. All right, I'm going to show you a photograph, Mike, here. It's been previously admitted as State's Exhibit, I believe, 2H. It's going to come up over the TV here.
That is us.
Okay, is that the famous prom?
Yeah, that's the prom picture. I had a lot more hair back then.
Okay, yeah, didn't we all? Mike, when do you think that was taken then?
Well, April of '79, I suppose.
So, was it during the play Pippin then when you first met and started talking to Michelle?
Yes. I mean, I'd seen her around. You couldn't go to Kennedy and not have seen her, really. That would have been hard. So I'd seen her around, and she was on the sort of choir band end of the building more than the sports end, and so was I. And so, I knew her to see her, but I didn't really get to know her until we were in that play together because she was a year behind me, and I was mostly hanging out with people in my own class.
Okay. Well, after you guys went to prom, did your relationship continue?
Yeah, and actually, once I'd asked her, we started dating even before that. We'd gone out a couple times before prom then, in groups and by ourselves and just whatever. But yeah, we pretty much started seeing each other right away after I was able to clear that first hurdle.
So for how long do you think you continued to regularly date Michelle?
Well, throughout the whole summer, and then at the end of summer, of course, I left to go to Iowa State, and it was different than today. At that point, where it's expensive phone calls and very, very slow snail mail letters were your only real means of communication, and so we were writing each other and talking on the phone when we could, but we were both broke all the time, and so it was not as much as maybe we would have liked.
I think saying it's different from today is an understatement.
Yeah, right.
When you went away to college then, what happened to your relationship with Michelle gradually and over time?
Well, yeah, I mean, she'd come to see me one weekend. There was a concert in Ames. It was the band Kansas, and she had come over and spent the weekend, and we hung out all weekend. That was in early October, I believe we had decided, and but then after that, it's like the long-distance thing was getting to be harder and harder over time, and I had come back at some point probably in mid-November to Cedar Rapids. I'd been able to catch a ride back with somebody, and I wasn't able to get together with her that whole weekend, and I just couldn't get her on the phone, or just nothing worked out. And so I talked to her after that and just realized that we were kind of drifting apart a little bit, that the long distance thing was too hard. And so, I had a Christmas present for her. It wasn't much. I'd bought her an album. Again, it's different than today. But I bought her an album and had a note for her and was ready to give her that. When I came back, I was hoping to see her at least, but I would think that we were not a couple anymore. We were just, I think, going to be friends more.
In fact, when you became aware that you might become a witness in this case, did you find something that you crafted for her?
Yeah, it's funny. I was not actually looking for stuff for this. I was looking for my Social Security card to get my Gold Star driver's license that you need to update to now. And in digging through some papers, I found a note that I had written her and clearly had never given her since I still had it, that just basically said, it said I love you at the beginning, but the middle of it was like, we can't be a couple anymore. We should just try to be friends and see each other, and then love Mike at the end.
And obviously, that was a no you never gave to her.
Right, or I wouldn't have it.
Right, well,
Yeah.
Of course. Mike, generally speaking, what kind of person was Michelle?
Well, she was, again, it was hard to miss her, but I don't want people to misunderstand. You see the big blonde hair, and I don't want people to think that she was a dumb blonde. She was definitely more mature and more sort of common-sensey smart than I was. And as I've thought more and more about this trial, I thought I was pretty smart back in the day, but I honestly think that just on smarts, she was smarter than me, too. So she was sharp, she was kind, she was emotional, she was generally happy and light, but there were some things that could bother her, and if those things happened, then she was mercurial and would, be pouty or sad or whatever it was.
Okay. Mike, we can tell you grew up because you just admitted that a woman is smarter than you.
Yeah, well, most of them are, I think, right?
I agree. Do you remember then around the time of December 19th, 1979?
Yeah.
And for the record, where were you on that day into the night into the next day?
Yeah, I had classes that day, and then although this wasn't always the case, I do remember I was doing homework in the early part of the evening, and then it was almost midterms, and so there were probably assignments that were due for the middle of that semester. And later I was hanging out with my roommate and some other friends from our dorm floor, listening to music and just hanging out.
And is that when you received word then about what had occurred?
Well, I didn't find out, of course, until the next morning, and a mutual friend of Michelle's and mine that had also gone to Iowa State, her name is Sherry Burns, had heard on the radio that Michelle had been stabbed, and didn't want me to hear it on the radio or whatever, and so she called to tell me, but she didn't actually say that she'd been killed. So I, of course, knew the Martinko's landline by heart, and so I just hung up the phone with Sherry, called the landline, got Mr. Marchenko on the phone, asked him if Michelle was okay, and he told me that she was not okay.
Mike, did you talk to law enforcement at some point in time around then?
Yes, I can't remember if it was the very next day, but I was getting ready to go back to Cedar Rapids for Christmas, and so as I could, I got my stuff packed up, went back to my folks's, and the next day then we went down to the police station, and I just said, you're probably going to want to talk to me because I was her boyfriend, and so I went down and had a chat with him.
And did you tell him that you were obviously away at college when this happened?
Yeah.
Okay. Mike, through our conversations, were you informed that there was a hair that was found in the vehicle that was traced to you?
Well, I didn't know until very recently, but yes, I do know that that's the case.
And does that surprise you at all?
It doesn't surprise me at all. We spent a lot more time in my car than in her car, but we spent a lot of time in cars.
Do you remember her car?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
This is your recollection. It's the kind of big, sort of light green Buick.
It's huge, and mine. What I was driving then was a similar boat-shaped vehicle. It was a Dodge Monaco, and so we both had these huge, oversized cars from the 70s. Yeah.
Mike, I think that's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Wyrick.
Morning.
Mr. Wyrick, on the subject of cars, you mentioned that had you been in her car, of course, the boat Buick?
Yes, many times.
And had you, on those occasions, driven the car yourself, or was Michelle Martinko driving the car?
I don't ever remember driving it. I could have, but I don't remember ever doing that. And again, like I said, we were much more likely to be in my car with me driving, but occasionally it would go the other way. I don't remember driving it.
How would you characterize her driving?
My driving?
Her driving.
Oh, gosh. normal. I don't remember anything about it.
Yeah,
I don't
not-
remember, you know, there's some people you ride with and it makes you nervous. I don't remember anything like that.
And the reason I ask you that, it's no surprise, you were interviewed about this investigation back in 1981, and as I read the interview, you described her as a terrible driver. Really bad.
That could be true. It's been 40 years. There's a lot of time to forget a lot of things.
So would you acknowledge that, at least back then, you characterized her as a really bad or terrible driver?
Okay, yeah, I mean, if I said that, I'm sure I meant it back then. I just don't remember.
Okay. Things weren't always peaches and cream between the two of you, were they?
No.
I mean, there was conflicts about other men, who she was seeing, created some confrontations between you and her.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Wyrick. Those are all the questions I have for you.
You're welcome.
Redirect Mr. Maybanks.
Yes, Your Honor. Mike, based upon your knowledge of Michelle around that time, were you aware of anyone in her life that would wish harm upon her or want to hurt her in any way?
No, not really.
Okay. All right. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything further, Mr. Spees?
Nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wyrick. You may step down. Yeah. State may call its next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls James Kinkead.
You're headed right over here to the witness chair. Watch those stairs. Before you take your seat, please pause and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Go ahead and be seated. There are just a couple of rules that we have when we are speaking in the courtroom. We can't interrupt one another because we do have a formal record here, so I would ask that you listen for the end of the question before you begin your answer, even if you know where the lawyers are going with those questions. I'm going to ask them to give you the same courtesy to allow you to finish speaking before they ask their next question. All right?
All right.
Please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names for the record.
James Kinkead, Kinkead.
And I assume James is James?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. You may proceed with your examination, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Kinkead.
Good morning.
There's a microphone in front of you. I'm going to have you maybe pull that a little closer just so everybody can hear you. Is that okay?
That's fine.
All right.
Fine for me.
How are you doing today, sir?
Good.
Okay. Do you go by Jim?
Jim, yes.
Thank you. Jim, how old are you?
73.
And are you currently retired?
Yes.
What was your occupation or occupations prior to retirement?
I was a Cedar Rapids police officer for 32 years.
And when did you retire as a Cedar Rapids police officer?
02.
So you would have joined the force in 1970?
Yes.
After retiring as a police officer, did you take up a second career?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that?
Janitorial
And where were you a janitor at?
at the police department.
So you couldn't get away from it even in
I-
retirement?
Yeah, I'd still be there if I could.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Harris. Maybe we have a witness up closer to the microphone, please.
If you could, I don't think your chair will move, sir. There you
Oh,
go.
how's that?
And maybe bring it up closer to your mouth, just tilt it up. I bet that'll work. Thank you.
Now, going back to when you were a police officer, what positions did you hold?
I was a patrol officer on the midnight shift.
And starting in 1970, can you walk us through the shifts you worked, if any of those changed?
Well, in the beginning, it was midnight to 8 in the morning. And then as I got a little more seniority, there was an overlapping shift that was 10:30 to 6:30 in the morning. And that's the one I was working.
And were you also a patrol officer in December of 1979?
Yes.
What were your job duties as a patrol officer?
Well, just to handle calls. If you were assigned to a beat, then you had certain duties, check buildings and...
Were you assigned to a certain beat?
That night I was Wild West, I think. Covered the west side, the whole west side.
Okay. Was that a common term for?
Yes, that was the beat.
Okay. Were you the only officer covering the Wild West?
Yes. And then there was a Wild East car, and then there was actually I think I was at a Wild City that night.
Now, Jim, did you work the case involving the murder of Michelle Martinko?
Yes, I did.
And were you on duty on the night of December 19th, 1979?
Yes.
What time would your shift have started that night?
10:30 p.m. 10:30 p.m.
Were you working alone?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever work with a partner?
Yes.
Okay, but at that time, you were riding by yourself?
That night I was alone.
Now, at some point during your shift, did dispatch send you to the Westdale Mall parking lot?
Yes.
And do you recall what time that was?
It was just a few minutes after 4 a.m.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about that night prior to 4 a.m., just what you recall from your shift?
Well, it was a busy night. Cold. Windy.
Had there been any prior calls earlier in the night involving this call that sent you to Westdale Mall at 4 a.m.?
I vaguely remember the attempt to locate going out, I think it was around 2 o'clock. And at that time, I was on a fight call out to Sheraton. So I wasn't able to pay much attention to it at the time.
Now, when dispatch asked you to go to the Westdale Mall parking lot shortly after 4 o'clock in the morning, what reason did they give you?
They gave me a description of a vehicle to see if it was possibly out there.
Okay. Did you know why you were going out there at that point?
No, I wasn't.
Now, when you arrived at the Westdale Mall parking lot, did you observe the car in the parking lot?
Eventually, I believe I came into the mall parking lot from Highway 149, which is kind of on the northwest side of the mall. And that's where I started my search. And I saw a couple of vehicles up there that didn't match the description. And then I noticed one in the lower lot that did match the description, so I went down there.
Okay. And what was that description of the vehicle that you'd been given?
There was a gold 72 Buick four-door. And I had the license number, but I don't remember what that was right now.
Okay. If I showed you a picture of the vehicle, do you think you'd be able to recognize it?
Oh, yes.
There's going to be an image that pops up on the screen above your shoulder there, Mr. Kinkead. I'm showing you what's previously been admitted as State's Exhibit 4C. Is this the vehicle that you observed on the night of December 19th, 1979?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Now, you mentioned coming into the parking lot in a certain area and not initially finding the vehicle. What area of the parking lot at Westdale Mall did you locate the vehicle?
It was in the parking lot just west of Edgewood Road. I think I forget the name of the bank now, American Federal. The bank that was in the mall parking lot was just north of where I found the car. And the car was probably about halfway in between the bank and Penny's.
I'm going to show you a diagram of the parking lot at the time, if that's okay.
Yes.
Your Honor, may I set up an exhibit?
You may.
Now, Jim, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 1A. If you could step down for a minute. If you'd like to take a moment to familiarize yourself with it.
I'm good.
Okay. You mentioned a few landmarks when you were talking about where the car was parked, a bank and a store. Could you show us on this exhibit where those would be located?
I think the bank is located right about here.
Okay. So you're pointing to kind of the top right corner of the parking lot in the lower parking area?
Right. And then, of course, Penny's is right here. When I found the vehicle, it's right here where it's marked.
Okay. And you're pointing to the parking spot that's marked on Exhibit 1A as Michelle Martinko's parking spot?
Yes.
And that's where you recall finding your vehicle?
Yes.
Thank you. We take a stand. Now, I believe you mentioned you saw some other vehicles in the parking lot when you got there. Is that correct?
I believe there was a couple of vehicles in the upper lot when I got there, and neither one of them matched the description.
Okay. Did you see any people in the parking lot?
Not that I remember.
What were your initial observations when you located Michelle's vehicle?
Well, when I first found it, I noticed that it was frosted over. I radioed in that I had found the vehicle, and they asked, was it unlocked? So I drove around the vehicle to see if I could see into it. No, it appeared that the vehicle was locked except for the driver's side rear door. That appeared to be, the knob was up. It appeared that it was unlocked.
After you discovered that the driver's side rear door was unlocked, what did you do?
I got out and went over to check it, and I opened that back door, and I saw there was someone partially laying or slouched down in the front passenger side seat.
So from your vantage point, you're looking in through the back door over the front seat,
Right.
and you can see somebody slouched over in the area of the front passenger seat. Is that correct?
Yes.
Could you tell what had happened to this person or
No.
what was going on at that point?
No, my first impression was it appeared like it was an older woman, and my first thought was that somebody's intoxicated and passed out in their car.
So what did you do next?
I walked around the car to the passenger side front door, and I looked in and saw Michelle there.
Okay. Can you go ahead?
With covered in blood.
Okay. Can you describe to us what you saw?
Well, she was slouched down. It appeared that there were several stab wounds on her chest. And I remember seeing a laceration on her chin. And there were no signs of life. She was obviously dead. Her dress was pulled up. She appeared to be fully clothed, but her dress was pulled up around her waist.
What describe the clothing that she was wearing?
She had I think it was a dress on, pantyhose, and she was wearing a rabbit fur coat.
Now, I believe you stated that it was obvious that she was deceased at that point, and pardon maybe a poor question, but what about it was obvious that she was no longer alive?
Oh, there's no movement. Absolutely no movement. Her eyes were open.
Did you observe blood?
A lot of blood.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
You may.
Jim, I've handed you what's been marked as State's Exhibits 3A, 3B, and 3C. Have you had a chance to review those pictures?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the State would move to admit State's Exhibit 3A, 3B, and 3C.
Mr. Spies, have you had an opportunity to review the proposed exhibits?
I have, Your Honor. No objection.
Hearing no objection, the court will receive and make part of the record State's Exhibits 3A, B, and C.
Now, Jim, can you describe to us what you're seeing in State's Exhibit 3A?
Well, this was the victim slouched down in the seat, covered in blood.
Is that photo consistent with how you saw Michelle when you looked in through the passenger window?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, request to publish State's Exhibit 3A.
You may.
And Jim, as you look at that picture, it's a fairly graphic picture, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Again, as you observed Michelle on December 19th, 1979, is this what you saw when you looked inside the passenger door window?
Yes, it is.
Looking next at State's Exhibit 3B, can you tell us what you're looking at in 3B?
Well, it appears that it's the rabbit fur coat that she was wearing that night.
And as you look at this photo, can you describe to us how she's positioned?
Well, it's hard to tell from this photo.
Towards the top of the photo, you see the rabbit fur coat, and it appears to be her
yes.
hand.
And her left hand.
Okay. Is that laying across the seat of the vehicle?
Yes, I believe it is.
And finally, looking at State's Exhibit 3C, can you tell us what we're looking at in this picture?
Well, that's her, from her waist down, shows her skirt or dress pulled up around her waist and her pantyhose.
Okay. And when you saw her dress was in a similar position, is that correct?
Yes.
But she was also at that time wearing her pantyhose,
Yes.
and she appeared to you to be fully clothed.
Yes.
After you discovered Michelle in the vehicle, what did you do next?
I called for backup
Okay. How did you call for backup?
on the radio.
On the radio? And I take it backup arrived?
Yes, Houston and Clark arrived shortly.
That'd be Officer Houston and Officer Clark?
Yes.
Okay. Once they arrived, what did you do at the scene?
Well, I also called for a commander and identification and detectives. And dispatch was getting curious to what was going on, so they had me go to a payphone and call in.
Okay. And why is it that you called in on a payphone?
We didn't have cell phones back then.
Were you concerned about people listening in on the radio?
On the radio, yes, of course.
Okay. And did you stay on scene until those various personnel arrived?
Yes, I came back after the phone call, secured the scene.
Okay. Now, while you were at the scene, with the exception of when you opened up the rear passenger door, did you touch anything else on the outside of the car?
No.
Okay. Did you touch the driver's side front door at all?
I don't think I did.
Were you ever inside the vehicle?
No.
Okay. Did you ever touch the gear shifter
No.
next to the steering wheel? Okay. Do you recall if you were wearing gloves that night?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I doubt that I was.
Okay. It would have been.
It was a cold night, but, you know, when I got out of the car and was out of the car for a while, I probably put my gloves on, but
Okay.
I think when I tried the door the first time, the back door, I don't think I had my gloves on then.
Okay. But you never touched the front door, correct?
No.
And the front door handle specifically?
No.
Do you recall how long it was that you stayed on scene with the vehicle?
Oh, it was probably an hour and a half, totally.
And what did you do after that?
Well, I turned everything over to Lieutenant Miller when he arrived, and then shortly after him, then Millsap arrived, Detective Millsap.
These are other members of the Cedar Rapids Police Department at the time?
Yes. And I think ultimately it was turned over to Millsap, who conducted the investigation.
And did you have any other involvement in the investigation of Michelle Martinko's death?
No.
Thank you. No further questions at this time.
Cross-examination, Mr. Spies.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Kinkead.
Morning.
Sir, when you arrived at the scene and were looking around the car, did you notice if there was any, let me ask you this, did you do a close inspection of the car yourself?
Eventually, yes.
And did you do that there on the scene, or did you do it after the car was removed to the Cedar Rapids Police Department?
At the scene.
Did you notice any body damage to the car,
No, I don't remember that.
or any scuff marks or scratches on the body of the car?
No, I don't remember that. And I didn't make any notes to that effect in my report.
And I guess that brings forth my next question. In preparation for your appearing here today, did you have an opportunity to look at any of your old reports or the
Yes.
interviews that were done of you back in 1981?
Yes.
Okay. So if I refer to those, you'll be able to reacquaint your memory with those reports?
Yes.
You mentioned, was it investigator or Detective Millsap that arrived at the scene?
Yes.
Was he a detective?
Detective.
Do you know if Detective Millsap might have entered the car?
I don't know. I never saw him in the car.
Okay. Was it Detective Millsap who made arrangements to have the car towed from the scene to the Cedar Rapids Police Department?
Yes.
And that would have been done by a commercial towing operator?
Yes.
In the hour or so that you spent there at the scene, did you look around the car to see if there was any evidence?
Yes.
Did you find anything of evidential
I
value?
didn't find anything. I believe Clark found some fur or hair behind the car.
More importantly, did you see any blood spots or blood trails around the car?
No.
And you've told us that aside from touching the driver's side rear door to open that, it's your recollection that you wouldn't have touched any other part of the car with the possible exception of the driver's side door?
That's correct.
You mentioned the weather as being cold and windy.
Yes.
Once the scene had been turned over to the investigators and the command staff, did you have any involvement in accompanying the car from the scene back to the Cedar Rapids Police Department? That is when it was towed.
I followed it back in.
All right. Did anyone watch the tow car operator unhook the car or move the car into the storage area?
I don't remember doing that, but I'm sure I did.
I guess.
I would have stayed with the car until it was securely in the garage.
Sure. And then, knowing how cars are towed, it would have been, was it lifted onto a trailer or simply towed, front end lifted up?
I don't recall.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kinkead. Those are all the questions I have for you.
Redirect Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just briefly. Now, Jim, you mentioned having gone to a payphone to make a phone call.
Yes.
When you did that, were there officers who remained with the vehicle?
Clark and Houston were there.
Okay, so it wasn't left unattended when
No.
you made this call. Now, when you observed the vehicle being loaded up to be towed and then towed back to the station, did you have any concerns about how that was done?
Not that I recall.
Okay, and if you would have had any concerns, you would have noted that or let somebody know?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Anything further, Mr. Spees?
Nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kinkead. You may sit down. State may call its next witness. You may. Thank you, counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to recess for about 10 minutes. There just as a quick item that the attorneys and I need to take up. So don't wander too far, but we'll see you back in 10 minutes. During the recess, please bear in mind that admonition I referred to each time we part ways. Don't make up your mind. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves. And we'll see you back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Please rise for the jury. You can leave your notebooks on your chairs.